Tactical Reality Dictionary, Cultural Intelligence and Social Control. Konrad Becker, edition Celine, Vienna. Introduction. Culture and Technologies of Control. Culture is not just the expression of individual interests and orientations manifested in groups according to rules and habits, but it offers identification with a system of values. The construction of cultural memory and establishing a symbolic order through setting up mental and ideological spaces is a traditional practice of cultural engineering. Symbolic scenarios generate reality by mediating an implicit political narrative and logic. Maps of the world radiating an aura of objectivity and marking out the ways of life are exploited as cognitive tools. An image of the world as simulation or map of reality can be highly inductive, and that explains the investment in cultural representation. From historiography of education, perception is influenced by mental scenarios that establish the symbolic order. According to Edward Bernays, a pioneer of modern public relations, the only difference between education and propaganda is the point of view. The advocacy of what we believe in is education. The advocacy of what we don't believe is propaganda. The development in electronic communication and digital media allows for a global telepresence of values and behavioral norms and provides increasing possibilities of controlling public opinion by accelerating the flow of persuasive communication. Information is increasingly indistinguishable from propaganda, defined as the manipulation of symbols as a means of influencing attitudes. Whoever controls the metaphors controls thought. The ubiquitous flow of information is too fast to absorb and create value in the economy of attention, includes the artful of use of directing perception to the certain area, to put some aspects in the spotlight in order to leave others in the dark. The increasing focus of attention on the spectacle makes everything disappear that is not within the predefined event horizon. Infosphere manipulation is also implemented through profound penetration in the communications landscape by agents of influence. Large-scale operations to manage public opinion, to evoke psychological guiding motivations, and to engineer consent or influence policy making have not been exclusive in the 20th century. Evidence of fictitious cultural reconstruction is abundant in the Middle Ages. Recent findings of the magnitude of forgeries, the large-scale faking of genealogies, official documents, and codices attracted broad attention and media interest. In 12th century Europe, in particular, pseudo-historian documents were widely employed as tools of political legitimacy and psychological manipulation. According to some conservative estimates, the majority of all documents in this period were fictitious. With hindsight, whole empires could turn out to be products of cultural engineering. Moreover, writers such as Martin Bernal, author of The Fabrication of Ancient Greece, have clearly demonstrated to what extent cultural propaganda and historical disinformation is contained in the work of European scholars. On the basis of racist ideas and a hidden political agenda, historic scenarios were fabricated and cultural trajectories distorted in order to support the ideological hegemony of certain European elites. The increasing informatization of society and economy is also the source of a growing relevance of culture, the cultural software in the psychopolitical structure of influence. During the so-called Cold War, Two issues of cultural hegemony were of importance. In publications such as The Cultural Cold War and How America Stole the Avant-Garde, Frances Stoner Saunders and Serge Goulbot offer a behind-the-scenes view of the cultural propaganda machine and provide a scene of the extravagance with which the mission was carried out. Interestingly, there were specifically efforts to support progressive and liberal positions as bridgehead against the communist threat. If one chooses to believe some contemporary investigative historical analysis, it seems that there was hardly a major Western progressive cultural magazine in the 50s and 60s that would not have been founded or supported by a cover organizations of intelligence services or infiltrated by such agencies. In the light of this, the claim made by Cuba at the UNESCO World Conference in Havana 1998, according to which culture is the weapon of the 21st century, does not seem unfounded. Information peacekeeping has been described as the purest form of war in the extensive military literature on information war. From Cold War to Code War, the construction of myths with the intention of harmonizing subjective experience of the environment is used for integration and motivation in conflict management. While intelligence is often characterized as the virtue substitute of violence in the informational society, information peacekeeping, the control of the psychocultural parameters through the subliminal power of definition in intermediation and interpretation, is considered the most modern form of warfare. Disinformation society. It is a boom time for intelligence agencies, not only state but private intelligence, mass surveillance, data surveillance, and information processing has grown into a major intelligence industry. While state intelligence is protected by secrecy in the interest of national security, prohibitive fees and large payments affordable by corporations only guard access to economic intelligence. Corporations, consumers of economic intelligence, routinely advance the merging of editorial information with corporate public relations in the media. The agenda of privately accumulated capital is further supported by a multitude of think tanks, which publish ideologically biased research and hidden agendas masked as independent academic works. Unlike the billion-dollar brainware industry put into place by corporate interest, there are no future heritage foundations of cultural intelligence, nor foresight institutes exploring the multi-dimensional potential of human experimental communication beyond the role as consumers. It seems as if the control of societal development is in hands of technocratic elites, ill-informed bureaucrats, and a shady but aggressive lobbyism. The layout of the future of communication is decided behind closed doors. Technologically determined environments increasingly shape society, but the democratic participatory potential is more and more excluded from a public debate. Most of the early hopes of emancipatory practice is a society based on information exchange seem to have vanished and turned into gloom. Instead, the potential of information and communication technologies for political control and repression seemingly has no boundaries, as its practical applications become more normal and manifest reality every day. The use of information technology for the deterrence of civilian dissent opens up a new dimension of political and cultural control. By the year 2002, high-resolution privacy intrusion is getting into the mainstream big time. Although 9/11 caused a landslide, this development has built up momentum for some years. The European Union's cross-border communication interception project and for Paul and the UK's Regulation of Investigative Powers (RIP) bill, which allows the police to intercept any communication using the public communication system, were among the early legal frameworks paving the way for the rise of the total surveillance society. Despite being taken up by the European Parliament in 1998, the Echelon Communications Interception System, set up in 1948, remains one of the secrets of Western intelligence agencies and out of the research of democratic accountability. Increasing proliferation of technologies of surveillance and control is not only useful for its potential to contain segments of society that fail to be integrated into the economy of machinic symbol manipulation, but the long-term effects of social homogenization through the command-control structure of technology are also highly desirable for global markets and opinion management. Future culture. The situation is getting even more precarious due to the fact that new media are ever more dominated by a dramatic concentration of private interest capital and the absence of the protection of the public interest by political representatives for a society at large. The public sphere can best be developed independently from the state and from dominant business interest. The logic of the control over the media market is strongly opposed to the cultivation and formation of the public sphere, and the dysfunctionality of media markets generates a crucial deficiency of participatory media culture. A society shaped by technological systems and digital communication should keep a perspective where cultural freedom can be actually pursued and in which use and value are not exclusively determined by profits. Therefore, it seems necessary to widen the basis of understanding to support a broad discussion on the political implications of ICT and to raise awareness on issues of conflict. Developments that need to be monitored with great awareness include the attack on privacy and the data body, the digital divide, the net slaves, and the deterioration of the workspace, the vanishing of a public sphere in the digital realm, the extension of copyright benefiting the content industry and IP lobby against the public interest, but also the establishment of one-sided technological standards, the militarization of cyberspace, and new possibilities of disinformation. Against this less than reassuring background, there is a surprising multitude of examples of emancipatory use of ICT to be found all over the world, and it has become undeniably an essential tool for political, cultural, and human rights activists. These groups and individuals are the ones that keep the spirit of the social use of communication networks alive and give an example of empowerment through new technology. Tactical Reality Dictionary. Ambiguous information, attentive relevance, behavior patterns, belief networks, coercive continuum, cognitive framing, consistent illusion, control stratagems, corporate intelligence, critical hedonism, cultural counterintelligence, cultural intelligence, cybercritic conspiracy command, control intelligence C4I, deceptive communication, deceptive intelligence, decognition training, digital ecology, digital human rights, dimensional framing, dream nation, electric emotions, embedded commands, expanded escapism, expert systems, explanation dividing, fluffy logic, future heritage, hyperpolitics, hypertopology, introduction codes, infobody attack, infobody biofeed modulation, intelligent pandemonium, investigative intelligence, knowledge representations, Leviathan supersystems, magnetic somnambulism, make-believe, manipulation patterns, meme slaves, memory construction, memory states, mesmerized data, microwave discommunication, mind modification, mind patterns, nested images, non-lethal action, pattern detection, pattern recognition, perception management, perceptive expectations, persuasive influence, persuasive internalization, propaganda propulsion project, psychotronic stimulation, reality engineering, sensor linguistic infiltration programs, social styling, spell checking, state control, structural delusion, symbolic order, synchronous isopraxis, synthesis cults, synthetic worlds, tactical truth, tactical synrealism, telepresent contagious postures, vast active living intelligence system, virtual patrol, who is who anonymous. Ambiguous information. The initial exposure to blurred, conflicting or ambiguous stimuli and data creates deep interference with accurate perception even after more and better information becomes available. This effect has been demonstrated experimentally with subjects that are exposed to a distorted blurred image. As they develop more confidence in the first and perhaps erroneous impression of ambiguous stimuli, this initial impression has more impact on subsequent perceptions. When the picture becomes clearer, new data is assimilated into the previous image, but the initial interpretation is maintained and resistance to cognitive change is upheld until the contradiction becomes so strong and apparent that it forces itself upon consciousness. The amount of information to invalidate a hypothesis is significantly greater than the amount of information required to make an initial interpretation, and the early but incorrect impression tends to endure. The difficulty is not acquiring new perceptions or new ideas, but that already established perceptions are difficult to change. They regularly force to form impressions on the basis of very little information. Human assumptions are not rejected or changed unless rather solid and extensive evidence forces to reconsider the analysis. As the impact of expectations and pre-existing images on perception of stimuli is related to the ambiguity of the stimuli and discordance of information, the intelligence analyst's own preconceptions are likely to exert a big impact, despite striving for objectivity. As cultural intelligence deals with highly ambiguous situations by definition, analysts adapt a strategy of suspending judgment for as long as possible. Attentive relevance. Attention as a mental process is the concentration and focusing on a stimulus, mental event or task. Viewed as the process of selecting some of the many available inputs, attention is a decision process in the systematic admission of information into consciousness. The capacity to selectively prepare our nervous system to process one set of stimuli, think about a topic, or make a response is an attention set. Attention is a limited mental resource. Automatic processes that operate parallel and where capacities are not coupled with intuition and are not requiring awareness do not strain attention resources. Thinking about the task might actually introduce errors. Controlled processing as for unfamiliar tasks, operates serially, takes attention, and is therefore resource limited. Human short-term memory, working memory, is limited in capacity with approximately 30 seconds and the capacity to keep around only 7 ± 2 information items, chunks. At any given time, several active or near-active conceptual processes are competing for cognitive resources and attention. A wide range of new information is monitored any moment, and there is an ever wider choice of information in memory which might be activated to provide a relevant context in which to process new information. Relevance is a theoretical term to refer to the cognitive utility of a piece of information in a context or for an individual at a given time. Human cognition is geared towards the maximization of relevance and the achievement of as many contextual effects as possible for as little processing effort as possible. Communication creates expectations of relevance in others, raises and exploits specific expectations of relevance. The human pursuit of relevance as a constant factor makes it possible to assume with a degree of success what others are paying attention to, and what they are thinking. They are paying attention to information that seems most relevant to them, combining this information with the most relevant contextual information available. Because humans follow this predictive pattern, they can act on each other's mind by manipulating expectations of relevance, and importance becomes a negotiated state of mind. Behavioral patterns. As the threat of international terrorism is projected globally, security agencies are given increased attention to nonverbal communication, which plays a growing role in the training of government, military, and law enforcement personnel. The ability to see signs in irregular or anomalous behaviors and time patterns is seen as essential to ensuring public security. The training focused on interpretation of intention, movements, clothing signals, abnormal gaze patterns, emotional voice tones, and deception cues, as well as seemingly meaningless grooming habits, facial expressions, and gestures. Motion energy maps show which areas of the face are activated to express given emotions. Integrated in observation tools, they enable computers to recognize and respond to emotion cues on the face. A multispectral digital camera image which displays a facial muscle contractions of specific emotions is analyzed for facial energy patterns used to read emotions, feelings, and moods. Additionally, a subject's bioelectric field can be remotely monitored with special equipment to read the brain's frequency pattern of evoked potentials. New surveillance systems use software that is distinguishing between people's normal activities and suspicious behavior. Software can recognize between people walking, talking, and acting normally and abnormal behavior such as a fight or someone collapsing, classifying features of human movement such as speed, direction, shape, and pattern. Neural network software learns and remembers patterns to create new programs generated from a formula to classify normal or abnormal. Enforcing homogenization of social behavior patterns through comprehensive automatic classification of normality is in the interest of not only large-scale psychological operations or technologies of political control, but also appealing for global mass market of consumer products. Belief networks. The cognitive effect of processing a piece of information is to allow fixation or revision of beliefs. Bayesian belief system and software for manipulating beliefs networks deal with uncertainty management, varying degrees of certainty giving a better match to real-world systems than logic requiring certainty. Fuzzy logic has been applied specifically to deal with concepts that are vague. Other approaches to problem solving include evolutionary techniques, genetic algorithms, genetic programming, or neural networks that simulate the effect of neurons and synapses in the brain. In bottom-up models of pattern recognition based on template matching, prototype and feature comparison theories distinguishes between detecting and integration. Processing starts with a part of a pattern and through manipulation yields a more richly specified output. The system works in one direction, starting from the sensory input and proceeding to final interpretation, uninfluenced by expectations or previous learning. Other models include structural description theory and top-down processes that focus on high-level cognitive processes, existing knowledge and expectations. The pattern of sensory input alone can explain the relatively stable and rich experience we have of our surroundings. The immediate perception of a specific interpretation clearly indicates that it is based on more than the sensory input or the information falling on our retina. The highly accurate guesses and inferences that are made rapidly and unconsciously are based on a wealth of knowledge of the world and our expectations for the particular moment. The influences of these sources beyond sensory input are collectively known as top-down influences. Expert behavior involves highly specific pattern recognition employed in sensation and perception. Reception on problem solving provides experimental support for a pattern-based knowledge acquisition approach. For expert systems and development is increasingly based on patterns rather than linear hierarchies of rules. The pattern-based approach to knowledge acquisition is centered on recognition memory rather than the more error-prone recall memory used to build general rules. A lot of human expertise seems to result from extensive experience in recognizing and reacting to specific patterns rather than the application of general rules to specific situations. Coercive continuum. Coercive persuasion or thought reform is understood as a coordinated system of coercive influence and behavior control designed to deceptively manipulate individuals in the interest of the originators of the program. Though reform is regarded as situational adaptive belief change and thought reform programs have been distinguished from other efforts in an overlapping continuum of social influence based on the descriptions of the social structure of thought reforming environments. Elements that distinguish from other socialization schemes to promote compliance are the interpersonal and psychological attack to destabilize an individual's sense of self, the use of an organized peer group and interpersonal pressure to promote conformity, as well as the manipulation of the totality of the subject's social environment to stabilize behavior once modified. Some of the social control characteristics of reform programs are typically control of communication, emotional and behavioral manipulation, conformity to behavior derived from doctrine, demands for confession, unconditional agreement to ideology, manipulation of language into cliches, reinterpretation of human experience and emotion in terms of doctrine and inferiority of those not sharing the ideology. The essential strategy used by such programs is to systematically select, sequence and coordinate numerous coercive persuasion tactics continuously over extended period of time. Though thought reform programs are sophisticated and subtle, creating a psychological attachment that is far more powerful than methods of influence that use only threat. Successful psychological destabilization includes a negative shift in global self-evaluations and increases uncertainty about one's value and position. It thereby reduces resistance to demand for compliance while increasing suggestibility. Coercive persuasion is applied in sequential phases of solve et coagula. In a three-phase model, this destabilization period is followed by a phase of change leading to a stage of reform, consolidation and reinforcement of thought. Influence procedures, commonly used during modern police interrogation, can inadvertently manipulate innocent persons' beliefs about their own innocence and thereby cause them falsely to confess. Confessions resulting from successfully applying sequential patterns and phases of thought reform are classified as coerced, internalized false confessions. The use of certain commonly employed interrogation procedures as a suspect with a minimum of psychological vulnerability is all it needs to elicit a temporarily believed false confession. Cognitive framing. A frame is a psychological device that offers a perspective and manipulates salience of influence subsequent judgment. By inviting to view the topic from a certain perspective, it not only offers a perspective but manages to the observer's alignment in relation to the subject. In a visual field, some objects are perceived as prominent while others recede in the background. Directing the viewer to consider certain features and to ignore others, perception is organized around the frame and may be resized to fit within the constraints of the framework. By implying a certain organization for the information, it co-creates the picture and influences judgment and information received. Influencing the way a problem is perceived can lead to radically different solutions. According to prospect theory, a human's first priority is not to lose, and gains are secondary to no loss. Framing a decision in terms of possible loss should motivate more than framing the same decision in terms of possible gain. A person is more likely to follow conservative strategies when presented with a positively framed dilemma, and choosing risky strategies when presented with negatively framed ones. All variants of the frame problem in a theory of mind are special cases of the problem of complete description. It not only appears within the situation calculus for representing a constantly changing world, closely related to the general problem of the laws of motion, which can adequately describe the world, but also in prediction, induction, reasoning, nature, language understanding, learning, and other problems. It is generally not possible to specify the necessary and sufficient conditions for anything, and it is even unknown what is meant by a complete description of, for example, everything that is relevant for a particular action in a particular situation in view of a particular goal. A prevailing framing effect is in media itself, where news programs may even try to follow the rules for objective reporting and yet inadvertently convey a dominant framing of the news that prevents most audience members from making a balanced assessment of a situation. Consistent illusions. Illusion can help to understand perception by offering clues when and how perception fails. While hallucinations are defined as a false perception in the absence of stimulation induced by drugs or other influences, illusions are misinterpretations of stimuli consistently experienced. The horizon illusion, in which the moon appears larger on the horizon than at the zenith, was discussed in antiquity and is still the subject of study. Illusions show the complexity of visual perception, but there is no satisfying theory for many of these illusions or even of the reasons why they should exist. They can be documented and classified, though, and they do have some practical applications. Illusions are no more or less illusory than anything else, but it is an illusion in the technical sense that if you take a physical measurement and compare that to your perceptual judgment, there is a discrepancy. There are several types of visual illusion that are characteristic artifacts of the visual system and give clues to underlying processes. A long list of optical illusions demonstrates some of these mechanisms. A lot of them have to do with dimensional effects and/or background-foreground effects resulting from a failure of estimation or from the faulty comparison of distances or objects. Illusions are also related to contrast of brightness and ambiguity. A picture drawn on a flat background is a deliberate illusion attempt to trick the eye into perceiving a three-dimensional scene. The skill of perceiving depth and perspective in the painting is learned and not innate. Since the eye, because the retina is two-dimensional, must do something similar in its normal functioning, this is very effective. Adaptation, where the ambient illumination comes to appear as white as possible, and color constancy, where colors are interpreted similarly under different conditions of illuminations, are not illusions but fundamental and useful properties of the color sense. From sensation, the reception of stimulation of the environment and their initial encoding into nervous system to perception, the cognitive processes through which we interpret messages those sensors provide. It is a human cognitive tendency to construct meaningful perception from fragments of sensory information and to group objects into well-organized whole structures instead of isolated parts. These groups of features into perceptual wholes is based on rules like proximity, similarity, continuation, closure, and common fate direction. Cognitive illusions, or the illusions of knowing, are analogues of optical illusions with a systematic discrepancy between a judged answer and a correctly measured answer. Individuals are subject to very consistent and predictable errors in judgment. These errors of reason are not due to lack of expertise or intelligence, but are embedded in the fundamental mechanisms by which we process information. Control stratagems. Fear and longing as prime human motivations have been used by techniques of influence engineering for ages. On the assumption that all targets are benefit seekers, the perception factor of good and bad, as well as status, having something or not, plays a substantial role. To provide a structure for understanding behavioral motivation, hierarchies of personal needs have been proposed. Physiological needs, survival, food, drink, health, safety needs, clothing, shelter, protection, affection needs, companionship, bonding, esteem needs, self-respect, achievement, appreciation, self-fulfillment needs, utilizing one's potential. The 36 stratagems of the Chinese secret art of war is an ancient collection that describes some of the most cunning and subtle methods that are applied in psychological warfare to undermine both the opponent's will and judgment. Manipulative information techniques can be classified in various systems and categories, but psychological influence stratagems do not replace procedures in psy-op planning, development, and dissemination. Self-evident techniques appeal to authority, slogans, name-calling, and so on, while other stratagems are based on information deficit of target or analyst, lying or selective omission, simplification, and choosing from a variety of facts only those which support the purpose are examples. While many techniques make use of dramaturgy, change of pace, stalling and deliberately withholding information, shift of scene to take the spotlight off an unfavorable situation by shifting it to another, are examples of this category. Others use chains of arguments, where an argument expressed or implied is a reason or a series of reasons offered as to why the target should behave, believe, or think in a certain manner, resulting in the inferred intent of the originator of the target audience. Corporate intelligence. Major PR firms, usually international operations, advertise their services clearly. The role of communications is to manage perceptions, which motivate behaviors that create business results, helping clients to manage issues by combined influencing of public attitudes, public perceptions, public behavior, and public policy. Corporate intelligence is a means of protecting corporate power against democratic forces, mainly through advertisement and public relations. To manipulate opinion and policy to their advantage and to confuse the public, corporations spend billions on hiring PR firms to cultivate the press and to manage spin control. Beyond advertisement, public relations applies advanced media relation methodology and uses authority transfer and third-party techniques, voicing their messages through trusted sources or independent experts. Corporate intelligence offers a broad range of services, from using polls and applying psychogeographical profiling based on operations research to find out what images and messages will resonate with target audiences, to active spying on critics, discrediting opponents, or co-opting citizen groups. Commercial public relations and crisis management firms routinely apply counterintelligence strategies to neutralize grassroots activist groups. In operation plans, activists are sometimes divided into 4 categories: radicals, opportunists, idealists, and realists. Deactivation of a social activist group is achieved by a 3-step strategy of isolating the radicals, cultivating and educating the idealists into realists, and finally co-opting the realists. The radicals, who usually have an agenda of political empowerment and social justice, are marginalized and discredited. The idealists are exposed to re-education and psychological persuasion. Pragmatic realists and opportunists are manipulated through trade-offs and perceptions of partial victories, manipulating citizens groups and fake grassroots mobilization, so-called astroturf, as well as the viral marketing schemes, have become a routine practice for agencies specialized in public affairs. Critical hedonism. Human needs to find ways to escape the vicious cycle of forced work for wages and imposed leisure, to escape symbolic dominance and cultural entertainment, the reality of everyday life and the flatlands of binary logic. The change towards an immaterialization of goods, electromagnetic pulses driving the global banking networks and media satellites is based on a change from bodywork to attention span management. Not the inclination for poetry, but the compulsion for complexity reductions paralyzes the information management into the occult, where the mesh of media creates black holes of attention and sells it off to the wormholes of the commodified anti-markets. Transactions and exchange is independently leading to desubstantiation of the economic process through immanent conversion of values. The economy of attention creates singularities, personified attractors of telemetric flash as mind focus, dark stars in media space, social sculptures with habits as capricious as tribal African fetishes. The transformation of the economic competition into a battle for attention is sometimes also seen as a hidden blessing in the power structure of the social organism. If the transfer of control from human to machine is part of a process aimed at disciplining the human body in order to increase its potential and at the same time gain control over its skills, the so-called abolition of slavery led to the introduction of a subtle form of generalized subjugation, where with the help of superior methods of control, the symbol manipulative intelligence of the workforce can be increased to meet the requirements of production. The assumption of solidarity of a working class seems a misconception when association with work is effectively the choice of losers. Political theories and movements relate to historic facts which can become dull and questionable with the advance of time. Hardly any fact can be truly verified anyway, so who cares? The brain filters out all but a few of millions of signals. The rest is called factual reality. The only fairly secure personal facts, birth and death, two numbers with a dash in between, produce a shift of interest from facts to effects. Human pleasure-seeking organisms born to have fun carry the risk of permanent brain stroke in an environment where enjoying yourself is a political risk. Synesthetic effects refer to the involuntary physical experience in which the stimulation of one sense modality causes an additional perception in different senses. The movement of hedonistic escape from materialism is a global language of zero-work ethics in full effect. Towards the united international hedonistic diversification, critical escapism will dance at the grave of ordinary pan-capitalism. Cultural counterintelligence. Psychological operations have been a vital part of the broad range of political, military, economic and ideological activities used to secure national objectives or private interests. Intelligence professionals insist on the efficiency of their manipulation methods. By the application of sound psyop techniques through face-to-face communication or media communications, it has been demonstrated time and time again that the appeal of the intelligence, reason and emotions of the target audience gets them to think and act as desired. Intelligence is the virtual substitute for violence in the information society. Counterintelligence, CI, requires systematic, detailed examination or inquiry as is concerned with identifying and counteracting intelligence manipulation by services, organizations or individuals. Targeting the information environment includes influencing culture, the cognitive industry and the artistic domain to manipulate the emergence of aesthetic norms and symbolic gestures. In a conflict of resistance to zombie culture, it is understood that traditional art can no longer be justified as an activity to which one could honorably or usefully devote oneself. The increased morbidity of this cultural battle space will add to the importance of stealth, mobility, dispersion and pursuit of a higher operational tempo. The artist, as a reality hacker, is a cultural intelligence and counterintelligence operator for what should more appropriately be considered parallel or hidden cultures instead of a common terms underground or marginal. In a world filled with propaganda alleging its existence, cultural intelligence methods against monopolization of perception and the homogenization of cultural patterns have developed to a variety of techniques. Pre-existing elements in society can be used to evoke a meaning that was not originally intended in these elements, and by transformation bring about an entirely new message that reveals the underlying absurdity of the spectacle. But not only the practice of subvertisement, cultural jamming, semiotic counter-terrorism, collective phantoms, media invasion, autonomous space exploration, all known means of artistic expression need to converge in a general movement of counter-propaganda, which must encompass all the perpetually interacting aspects of social reality. Cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence gathers, evaluates and processes meta-information about the foundations of information-based society. This includes clear analysis and investigation of its societal, cultural, economical and political potentials and dangers. Cultural intelligence serves the public interests through empowerment and acts as a balance to traditional military or economic intelligence services that gather information to increase control. Cultural intelligence services compensate the public's lack of meta-information as socio-political and cultural foundation for decision-making. These services need to foster and protect the public sphere and discourse as well as the variety and richness of cultural expressions in a society increasingly determined by information and communication technologies. To meet the public's need for high quality and accessible cultural information and content, cultural intelligence processes information in development and probable courses of action in the infosphere. Cultural intelligence advocates citizens' rights of cultural freedom, freedom of opinion and expression, communication and privacy. By observing and analyzing enlightening cultural, socio-political, technological and economical trends, cultural intelligence counters indoctrination and propaganda. Cybercratic Conspiracy Command Control Intelligence C4I. This is no longer about the individual looking at the media, but the media staring back. The worlds have become alive with disturbed computational intelligence, top-side telecommunication of remote viewing and control, overwhelming dominance of electric information system, digitalized footprints of social transactions, allowed to process information over long sequences of widely dispersed activities, a perpetual, pervasive surveillance. The game is to monitor everything, everywhere, all the time. Unintentional modulation along the unintentional emission constitutes examples of lesser known forms of signal and electronic intelligence. An edition of the DoD Dictionary of Military and Associated Terms explains signal intelligence, SIGINT, as a category comprising all communication intelligence, COMINT, electronics and telemetry intelligence, and involves the reception and characterization of electromagnetic radiation. SIGINT effectiveness is at a point where virtually all electromagnetic communication is highly vulnerable. Many agencies owe their existence to the secretive, continuous absorption of electromagnetic emissions. You might say they are harvesting and feeding on it. Confronted with omnipresent, all-seeing data mining banks, passivity and compliance is the safest route for any citizen, avoiding anything a computer would find interesting. Deceptive communication. Most aspects of human communication can lead to misapprehension simply because there is no single way of interpreting a communication. There are subtle mechanisms that can lead to vastly different interpretations, and without appropriate context, there is no way to rule out one or another. Although in normal conversation this is problematic, in deceptive communication this is a desired attribute. Considering whether communication is deceptive or not depends on the viewpoint and the intentions behind the communication, which is often difficult to ascertain. Deceptive communication has different forms and is serving different purposes: concealment, exaggeration, equivocation, half-truths, misdirection, pretense or irony, which relies on similar linguistic patterns, can all be considered as types of deceptive communication. Pretense mechanisms may be implemented in a number of other mental processes, like counterfactual reasoning or attribution in mind-reading skills. while intentional deceptive communication is deliberately attempting to conceal. Unintentional deception occurs depending on a number of factors based on lack of context and equivocation, resulting in confusion and misunderstandings. The use of negations has been identified as a behavioral indicator of deception in human communication, as the cue is usually not perceived as signaling. Deceptive communication using non-committal and ambiguous negations are a most effective linguistic deception device. For example, I wasn't sure, I don't know, I could not tell. Deceptive communication is rated as most effective and credible when it includes equivocal negations, despite it causing more confusion, misunderstanding, and difficulty in comprehension. Deceptive intelligence. All communication has an element of deception. Code theory of communication proposed that as long as the transmission is clear and the code used to interpret the transmission is correct, then there is no discrepancy between the message sent and the interpreted message. Communication between humans relies on context and relevance and does not ensure true communication when transmitted by the sender, or that the right context is used to interpret the message by the receiver. Communication depends on both parties to share a frame of reference, to interpret tone, intonation, and idiosyncratic expressions in the same manner from among a multitude of possible interpretations, and to remember the same concepts in the identical way. Deliberate deception in intelligence and military actions is executed to mislead adversary decision makers as to capabilities, intentions, and operations, and to cause the adversary to take specific actions or inactions that will contribute to the accomplishment of a mission. The U.S. Army Handbook, The Law of Land Warfare, names the deceiving by wrong orders, the use of enemy codes, slogans, and signals, as well as targeted wrong instruction and propaganda. Professional agency deception work is rooted in psychological operations where selected information and indicators is conveyed to foreign audiences to influence their emotions, motives, objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of foreign governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. Psychological operations, a non-lethal weapons system also called Psy-OP, Joint Publish 102, induce or reinforce targets with attitudes and behavior favorable to the objectives. The topics of or ideas on which a psychological operation is based are called psychological themes. Once it is known what motivates the target, psychological operations can begin. Decognition training. Hyper-state control, as a political tool, uses psychologically coercive techniques in order to introduce subjects. The end justifies the means to form an elitist totalitarian society. If you make a person behave the way you want, you can make that person believe what you want. Hyper-state control techniques are based on the same principles as mind control techniques studied in social control systems of cult groups and social bodies in general. Among them are practices of isolation, regression, metacommunication, implanting subliminal messages by stressing keywords or phrases in long, confusing explanations, and group pressure. The aim is alertness reduction, programmed confusion, and flattening of the mind. The chthonic wheel expresses itself against the conscious mind when ordinary thinking is silenced, distracted, and thoroughly deranged. electronic dissolution of memory, EDOM, is accomplished by electronically jamming the brain with microwave technology, causing excess amount of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine to create static within which blocks out sight and sounds. Memory can be stopped for as long as the radio signal continues. The awareness of the person skips over the time during which he is subjected to the radio signal. Any memory of the incident is gone, the mind is blank, memory is distorted, and time orientation destroyed. Digital ecology. Digital ecology is about understanding information ecosystems constituted by information flow being processed through various media. Information has become widely digitalized and turned into a resource to be exploited, produced and transformed in a similar way as material resources. A key ecological issue concerns the preservation and increase of the use value for the public at large and the non-commercial properties of information as opposed to the exchange value. Digital ecology aims at understanding the production, distribution, storage, accessibility, ownership, selection and use of information in technologically determined environments. Economic forces, market failures and political interventions endanger the ecosystem of the infosphere, the pluralism and variety of cultural expression offered by information and communication technologies. Digital ecology seeks to preserve and increase the cultural diversity and quality of life in the information ecosystem. Digital human rights. Digital human rights is the extension and adoption of the universal human rights to the needs of an information-based society. Information society increasingly employs advanced information and communication technologies that all stem from a military background. These tools are extended into non-lethal weapons technology and can be easily abused in the hands of governments or corporations and used against the interest of the general public in a highly dangerous way. New power structures arise with the potential to substantially dominate those lacking skills and assess the communication tools. Therefore, realization of digital human rights shall grant that every human may participate in this medium and use it potentially freely and unrestrictedly. Digital human rights are based on the understanding of communication as motor of civilization and a base of individuality as well as society. Basic digital human rights include the right to access to the electronic domain, the right to freedom of expression and association online, and the right to privacy. The digital divide between those who access to the new electronic communication channels and those without violates the right to education and skills in the technologies of the infosphere and the right to a basic level of information via public institutions and service providers. Online free expression shall not be restricted by direct or indirect means, such as censorship, restrictive governmental or private control over hardware or software, telecommunications infrastructure, or other essential components of the electronic networks. The right to privacy, anonymity, and security includes the protection from arbitrary surveillance of either content or association online, as well as the right to choose privacy technology such as cryptography to protect communication. Efforts that lead to the development of communications infrastructure designed for surveillance, individualized users' profiles, tracking data traces, or intercepting online communication for surveillance or marketing purposes violate this right. Dimensional framing. States receptive to hypnotic suggestion are likely to bring about sensations of hyperreality, more detached or more connected than usual to your surroundings. Using every element of the environment to build the subject's experience is the key to immersion. Using everything and feeding back to the subject what they observe is essential to successful induction. Distractions are incorporated in order to take subjects even deeper in trance. a seamless tapestry of the imaginary space. Building a rich sensory description of a desired state will create a rich sensorial experience in the subject while changing state through reframing questions. An information menu is a special form of map. Symbolic orientation systems attributed with the aura of objectivity are a traditional subject of military and extra intelligence. Distortions from dimensional effects and the use of perspective have always been an instrument of power, and topographic maps are processed and manipulated for strategic reasons. In world maps, projections of a 3D sphere into the plane are propagandistically used regarding size and the center of power. The trapdoors of perception are wide open for travelers on territorial maps. With the complexity of a non-linear information system, as in hypermedia, one can expect not only enhanced retrievability of data, but also a field for manipulation of a higher order. A major threat in modern life is being killed by your own defense system, which has been triggered too often by direct and indirect hypnotic suggestions, automatic clusters of deep trance phenomena that act as our patterns of defense. Not taking responsibility for the frames then means something else will. Dream Nation. Dictionaries define hypnosis as an induced sleep-like state in which the subject readily accepts the hypnotist's suggestions. Hypnosis, a derivative of the Greek word hypno meaning sleep, is a sleep-like state and not sleep itself. Everybody has been in various hypnotic states for many times without notice because it seemed natural. Hypnotic states are normal for humans and animals, and people frequently lapse into a hypnotic state, triggered anytime a person remembers a sequence of events. Hypnosis is associated with hypersuggestibility, whereby subjects accept suggestions at deep levels of consciousness. Anyone is hypnotized, as the common link between most situations of hypersuggestibility appears to be a narrow selective focus of attention resulting from such diverse conditions as sensory isolation, relaxed attentiveness, or extreme fear. There does not appear to be a single common EEG pattern in hypersuggestibility which could make hypnotized individuals distinguishable, though there are hints of unique evoked potential responses. Many do not recognize the state of hypnosis because what they expect is to become unconscious. But unless you achieve deep somnambulistic levels, this is not what it is likely to be. Language itself is infected with the unconscious to the point where language is a collective dream. Electric emotions. In 1996, the New York Times reported on Dr. Michael Persinger, a neuroscientist at Laurentian University in Ontario, with relations to clandestine agencies and his experiments with solenoids and transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. It exploits the fact that neurons are comparable to electrical devices. When a nerve cell is activated, it triggers a flow of electrons, and when reaching the nerve end, the electrons induce the release of chemicals that pass to neighboring nerve cells. Thus stimulated, those cells continue the process throughout the brain. TMS allows the programming of patterns at which the fields will fluctuate. The impulses move through the temporal lobe and penetrate deep into the brain, where they interfere and interact with the complex electrical patterns of the subject's neural fields. The new sequences spread through the limbic system, producing sensations that range from subtle to profound and can produce rather bizarre experiences such as thumb moving, while the visual impression of the subject is that it remains still. The magnetic device can produce mood changes, sadness, happiness, sexual arousal, and the experience of sensing a negative presence or benevolent force. Focused on the hippocampus, the device produces ecstatic effects, but if you interfere with the opiate pattern, people get very irritated. Persinger says. Embedded commands. Even though the Milgram experiment on obedience and individual responsibility showed that humans possess the capacity to relinquish their autonomy, people find it difficult to accept that individuals can be hypnotized to perform an act which is against their moral principles. U.S. Army experiments suggest that this popular perception isn't true. On the contrary, they concluded that people could be induced to commit acts contrary to their morality if their reality was distorted by hypnotic state control. One of the experiments involved trying to manipulate a normal, stable army private to attack a superior officer, a cardinal seen in the military. While in deep trance, he was told that the officer sitting across from him was an enemy soldier who was going to attempt to kill him. In the private's mind, it was a kill or to be killed situation. The private immediately jumped up and grabbed the officer by the throat. The experiment was repeated several times. Department of Psychology chairman at Colgate University, Dr. Estabrook, one of the most authoritative sources stirring up fear of mind-controlled six-columnist in wartime USA, stated, "I can hypnotize a man without his knowledge or consent into committing treason." Expanded escapism. Escape is of particular importance as a tactic for individuals or small groups. To evade an attack instead of looking for confrontation gives small, flexible and mobile units an advantage over large hierarchical structure of dominance. Society's disapproval of a flight from reality quickly unveils itself as a propaganda lie targeted at the educated classes. Ultimately, it cannot be determined which reality is meant in this scenario, ravaged by the misery of the normal and the terror of normality. Reality as a normative hallucination is the virtual prison system of a social organization. Individuals that flee from these representations and concepts of the world have more choices than those who cannot escape the straitjackets of imposed reality. In a society where fear has advanced in boredom as a most effective method of counter-revolutionary control, Houdinists and hedonic engineers explore escape routes from an anxiety-bored society, knowing that speed and deception secretly free from imposed values. The prerequisite for the successful escapist flight is to master the terrain. Navigation requires the manipulation of symbols in significant representations of spatial topological structures. World maps, the tool of power politics and military intelligence, projects proportional distortions of n-dimensional space into the plane for propaganda purposes. Maps do not only offer an abstract view of the world itself, but also contain information about those who create them. This becomes particularly obvious with old maps. If we want to find out from which perspective the world is presented, we just have to look for the center of representation. The ways of life are flanked by representational systems, effective inducers with enforced non-representation of profits. In the center, seamless parquetry and non-local tilling of the imaginary space is a telematic manetical for scotomic visualization. A trap is any of various devices by which one is caught or stopped unaware, confining or placing in a restricted position and preventing passage of something while allowing other matter to proceed. The escape artist is an expert on the topology of the knots and strings that bind him, de vinulis in genere, and a specialist when it comes to the warps and distortion of planes, lines and forms. As a technical version of Jacob's ladder, the functional principle of a controlled emergency escape is visualized in the international symbol of a fire escape emergency ladder. The opening becomes a carrier for a vision. The intermediate space turns into steps taken towards a way out, not just up and down, left and right, ana or kata, as proposed by the hyperspace pioneers. In hypercontextuality, the standpoint changes into a line, opinion into a question of style, as everything is connected in the hyperspace design of the biomass. The children of the synvolution expand the personal resonance with non-finite resources and transcode the synlogistic permaflux to escape from the vicious circle of coded projections and perceptions toward a non-deterministic hyperspace. Expert systems. An expert system is an example of a knowledge-based system. Knowledge-based systems do not just store data, but also the rules that can be used to manipulate the data to answer questions about it. This knowledge consists not only of sets of rules about how to manipulate different kinds of data, but uses methods for representing knowledge and enables acquisition and integration of new knowledge. Knowledge representation and processing information about the world is a major concern for development expert systems. Pattern recognition and the ability to learn are key characteristics of intelligent systems. An expert system provides expert advice, decisions, recommendations, and solutions, replacing a real person. In an expert system, the program incorporates the knowledge of an expert in a particular field. These systems should capture and deliver knowledge that is not easily represented using traditional computing approaches. Pattern recognition plays an important role in expert systems, and there is growing interaction between expert systems and pattern analysis. Core elements of pattern recognition, including learning techniques and inference, play an important and central role in artificial intelligence. Visual perception, scene analysis, and image understanding are essential to robotic vision. Methods such as knowledge representation, semantic networks, and heuristic searching algorithms can also be applied to improve the pattern representation and matching techniques for so-called smart pattern recognition. Problem-solving expertise needs memory, knowledgeable schemas, and representation. The transfer of decision-making and problem-solving to machines has a high economic potential, and the need of finding models for problem solution has also initiated research in the question of how humans do it. The goal of cognitive psychology is to understand the nature of human intelligence and how it works. Explanation driving. There is a strong need to understand what is going on in the world, and the type of explanations endorsed will shape future behavior. Attribution theory demonstrates how people create attitudes or beliefs or behaviors depending upon the explanations they make, influencing how people understand and explain what is going on around them, controlling the attributions people make, maps out their future behavior. An external attribution assigns causally to an outside agent or force. Internal attribution assigns causally to factors within the person. while attributions to external sources are less likely to change attitudes. Through internal attribution, it is highly probable that targets will come to view themselves differently. Seemingly, people making an internal attribution for their actions also change their attitudes and beliefs about themselves. They turn into that type of person, and the desired behavior follows consequently. Capture their minds and their hearts, and souls will follow. People need consistency in their lives and in explaining their world, and consistency theory illustrates that there is also a tendency to expect consistency. Facing inconsistencies creates a state of dissonance, and the experience of dissonance drives an urge to restore consistency. A way to get rid of this dissonance is to change the way one thinks. Re-evaluation or denial are just two possibilities, but both involve some mental work that changes the way of thinking about things. Avoidance of dissonance also explains opinion based on selective exposure, where largely information that might be contrary to existing views is not pursued. Dissonance is experienced as a result of subjective inconsistency, while the reaction to a perceived external inconsistency or unfair restriction is referred to as reactance. Both reactance and dissonance are powerful motivating agents, and